So I'm here at Money 2020 in Las Vegas with Kartik from RBC and Matthew from IBM. Welcome. And before we start, can we spend about 30 seconds to give us a brief intro on what you guys do?
My name is Kartik Kaushik. I work for RBC Capital Markets. I'm the managing director and I'm starting a new business for them called RBC Clear.
And I'm Matthew Angelstad, senior partner within IBM Consulting, banking financial services.
Well, thank you so much for joining me this morning. So let's get right to it. RBC Clear. I'm super curious because I've been reading quite a bit about it. I heard something that this was something that was born with 150 conversations, if I'm correct, and you assembled a client advisory council, and all of that leads to the beginning of the RBC Clear Journey. So tell us a little bit more about that journey, how that came about, and share with us some of the insights.
Sure. So as we set out on this program, we all talk about customer centricity. We said, let's put our money where our mouth is. So we started with the client advisory board. 28 of our prestigious clients joined us as we decided to go on the path of reimagining cash management and treasury. And that's the 150 conversations we talk about. It had a couple of key pointers to it. One, that we wanted to be anchored around client needs and client future views, which is really the big benefit. Second, because we were starting out with a blank canvas and the opportunity to write what would be potentially another 20, 30 years of usage of a platform, we thought it was the right thing to do to have the rubric to be a client view rather than our own imagination of what it could be. And that's really what we did with setting up a client advisory board.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, this space in particular too, Kartik, and we've talked about it before. You look at personal consumer banking that has really evolved over the last several years in terms of digital experiences and the services that are available. The corporate banking world and treasury departments, that's really lagged due to old cumbersome processes and outdated monolithic architecture as well. And this is with the thinking behind RBC Clear and how they re-envisioned how you'd go about it.
So you asked me about insights, and Matthew alluded to a few. The clients were continuously talking to us about what was in it for them, right? Because it's not a new business; it's something that's existed for a while. So what is it that they wanted as change? And when we asked them, there are a few themes that emerged, right? The first theme was that it is a very heavy operation-heavy business model, right? Yes, a little bit of digital on the front end, but predominantly analog, both in terms of processes, heavy manual intervention, and policies being digital, non-digital as well. The second theme that they kept talking about is in a business like money movement, which is the most critical, mission critical business for any corporation, why is it that we have challenges of operational effectiveness? So for example, a simple thing like opening a new account. On an average day, it would take 45 days for a corporate to open an account. Now, that is unacceptable in today's world where everything is real time, everything is frictionless. In the consumer side, like Matthew said, I could do it instantly. So why does a corporation need to go through such a process? And then they would say some interesting things like, there's no K in your KYC. So we said, what do you mean? They said, we do business with you. We could be a lending client of yours, and yet you start by asking me the same questions. I have an account with you, I have a second account, you ask me the same questions again. So at what point of time will there be an opportunity to say, you actually know us, why are we starting afresh? And similarly, the average treasurer, as Matthew said, the complexity of the old technology is that you can't see the state of your money in real time, which means that I actually upload a payment, then I don't know where it is. And I hope that it lands with the vendor or the employee that it's supposed to land. And I only know it didn't when they alert me. That's not an acceptable place to be as a client. And then there are other complexities of what I call transparency, because the average client is subject to sometimes 60, 70 pages of a monthly statement. And as they jokingly told us, you need a doctorate to actually decompress that statement and digest it. There are various other challenges, as you can imagine, of a manually heavy process-driven model. So that is really the big themes. And the clients fundamentally said, RBC, you have a right to have a seat at the table, but you got to earn the right to win. And that you would earn by doing solving the existing pain points that have existed for 20, 30 years, but taking us to the pathway of the future, because we want to be in control rather than always subject to the bank's decisions.
I love what you just said, actually, in the very beginning of our conversation. You used the word reimagine. I caught that. And then the blank canvas. Is there a specific reason why you wanted to start that way?
So it was a very beautiful view that came from the clients. As we were looking at what they needed, if you thought about what were the constraints were existing platforms. They were typically 30-year-old platforms. And this is where the technological challenge that Matthew was alluding to. If you have 30-year-old platforms and over the years you've kind of done what in technology word would be called band-aids or extensions or wraparounds, because the system was not designed to handle the today's needs. So think about, today's world and a modern platform, but versus an old platform that had limitations of how the design could be. So today we all talk about cool things like microservices, event architecture, cloud, but we didn't have that luxury 30 years back. So people kept adding little pieces wrapped around the process. So information was not traceable. So if I take it down to what the real causes of the platform challenges were, information was not traceable. There was no gold copy of the information because it was sitting in different systems, right? The client could not see the movement of the money because it was handoffs were so many. It was very heavily manual in process. So fundamentally what they were asking for, which is the 4 pieces that I talked about, and I call it the STAR framework, which is they were looking for sophistication because they are corporate and institutional clients. They are the Fortune 1000, right? But they were looking for simplification of their journey. They were looking for traceability and transparency. And that was an underpinning theme that they were asking for. They were looking for actionable insights, not information. They were not looking for us to dump reports. They wanted to know what they should do next in today's world. And lastly, they were asking for real-time frictionless. They wanted to eliminate the friction, the inefficiencies, the lack of effectiveness of the process. And that is really the 4 big themes. And when we looked at what existed, even with RBC and say the Canadian business that we have, we were also in that same ecosystem or cohort of the traditional legacy platforms. So RBC made a very bold choice, I would say. This is where the true client centricity comes, to say we will invest in what would be the future of the platform and the industry and do it right for the clients rather than do another, little bit of band-aids and use the current system and solve for today's needs. That's really the germination of the idea to do a blank canvas.
And I think that's what was so powerful in your case and in that of RBC is not to continue to be encumbered by those legacy processes, by those legacy systems. It was to leverage what was appropriate to, but then rethink, reimagine those end-to-end workflows, what we call intelligent workflows, right? Deployed on hybrid cloud architecture and infused with data, AI, and hyperautomation. That gets the dramatic experience increases and changes that Kartik and the RBC team were able to realize.
That's where the word reimagination came from, because in the world of technology, and all of us have lived this, we always re-engineer because you're starting from something that exists, right? And this is the first time, because we didn't have anything to start with, there was an opportunity to reimagine. And as you can imagine, there is no playbook for that in the marketplace.
That is actually beautiful. I can almost imagine like a painter putting all the different pieces and parts together to create a different picture, right? So tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that you've come along the way, and also some of the milestones that you've achieved so far.
It's been a very interesting learning journey, right? As I said, there is no playbook, right? So one of the most important pieces was, how do we work within the ecosystem of a large, giant financial institution? It's a top 10 bank in the world, right? So we have the weight and the power and the heft and industrial strength. But how do you create a nimble, agile ecosystem within that, which, by the way, is intended to disrupt the existing business model of the parent? And that is a very rare moment. So it required a few things. One, it required what I call an intellectual humility at the parent's level to understand that they were actually facilitating a transformation of a very different nature, right? And I would give a lot of credit to the management team for actually having that, both the ambition, but also the humility in terms of learning afresh what it could be. The second set of challenges was that it's always tempting to do everything new, right? So reimagination is not about net new. It's about reimagining what the existing is, which means you have to allow for the clients to also come along with you. Just merely putting out something that is futuristic, but not actually enabling the true change that they're looking for, that's a delicate balance. So how do you carry the continuity in the design while actually giving something new? So we had to put together what I call a very unique combination. People who had been 30 years in the industry had not had the opportunity to reimagine, right? And those who had reimagined were not in the industry and didn't understand the very heavy regulatory onus of money movement, which is mission critical. So how do you bring a blend of that? So structure inherently was itself a challenge. Talent as a result was a challenge. Culture, how do you challenge everything that exists, and to what extent do you challenge? Do you challenge just at the technology level? Do you challenge at the process level? Do you challenge at the business model level? Right? And that was a learning curve. And then finally, in every innovation, you could either be an innovator and stay at the fringe of a large institution, or you actually try and create a cultural change which is mainstream. RBC allowed us to be part of that latter. And therefore, how do you borrow the best from RBC while helping the organization rethink and transform? So those were some of the biggest challenges that we had as we went through. And to me, the opportunity to fail and recover actively while still meeting the what I call the organizational rituals of the large giant, of the power and leveraging that power, was the balance that we had to strike.
Yeah, and I look at some of the successes that you've been able to realize with the launch of RBC Clear. Take onboarding as an example. You mentioned typical onboarding period anywhere 45 to 60 days. By leveraging that thought process, using what was appropriate that existed within the organization, yet reimagining what's possible all through the lens of the client, which is absolutely key, able to reduce that to a matter of hours. Now, that is dramatic. And in fact, since the launch of RBC Clear, I'll do it for you, Kartik, tremendous industry recognition and awards even in terms of the digital nature and the onboarding experience for RBC Clear. So absolutely tremendous.
And I would say the most important piece is the clients wanted, and I said they wanted to be in control. So little nuances to what Matthew said. It's not just about the process, but actually a client able to self-onboard, able to direct the journey, able to know where they are in the process, able to see the value of that journey for themselves. So for example, little things. A client, I started by saying, put the K back in the KYC, right? If they've given us documents, if they have given us material that explains to us the KYC already, another part of the institution, how do you bring that back to life and actually show them? How do you keep it current? How do you actually create the life cycle value of it? Little things on every aspect of what the control aspects are, but also the governance aspects, really makes that story powerful. So we are very excited that we got the industry recognition awards, but to me it's a recognition of the clients having helped us and collaborated with us to produce something that's actually useful for them and sets them up for the future. That's the power of what we've achieved so far.
That story is so powerful. I don't even know where to begin. It's absolutely amazing. If I may utter that word that everyone is talking about every single hour of the day, emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence. What role does that technology, those technologies help you reimagine, for example, the customer experience?
So I will pick that up and I'll hand over to Matthew as the person who understands the technology the best here. But as a business owner, for me, the power of what was happening with machine learning, but now AI and generative AI, is the opportunity to take what I call high-touch, low-value business models to high-touch, high-value, and eliminating the low value so that people can actually focus on generating value and doing work that uses the power of their intellectual heft. So a couple of examples in the business model that we talk about. We know that we deal with onboarding process and there's a lot of legal involved, right? Think about the opportunity to take large language models and have the reconciliation between the two sides and solve for the up and down and the validation of very large documentation to do it intelligently and take away the work that is non-value adding, but focus only on the exceptions and the negotiations that are value added would be very powerful. Similarly, the work that IBM is partnering with us is a big disruption because this is a segment where you get large files and the client has to adjust to the bank's needs of the format, the file. There are different kinds of formats. One doesn't talk to another. And we asked IBM to see if there was an opportunity to kill this entire translation challenge and do it digitally through the leverage of AI. And I'll let Matthew explain what we are working through. And it's pretty exciting what it could be.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I'll take a step back first and say, in working with leading organizations such as RBC and other banks and financial institutions around the world, we've seen them ultimately land on a hybrid multi-cloud architecture, right? Because there was no one cloud that suits all applications and workloads, right? We're seeing the same thing happen in AI and generative AI now. There is no one model that suits every use case, right? And you have to evaluate that across multiple dimensions when you're looking at it, such as performance, cost, trust, transparency, and the security that wraps around it as well. This is where IBM Watson X and the IBM Granite large language models can help. Specifically to the use case Kartik's talking about, what we've done with the team there is take disparate source files from any company's systems, out of their ledgers, their payments, transaction systems, etc., and able to dynamically now generate the code to translate, source, convert into industry standard formats such as ISO 20022, NACHA, etc., and route those files downstream for the transaction processing. That activity or process cycle that I just explained used to take a matter of weeks. It was a tremendous burden either on the corporate clients to translate those files to the bank's nomenclature and then downstream for those industry standards, or the bank's IT teams to do that work. Now, again, through generative AI, Watson X, the Granite models, we're dynamically doing it. It takes a matter of hours. We've seen so far 85% productivity improvement for that end-to-end cycle. And again, it goes back to Kartik's kind of North Star, if you will, through the client lens of how do we reduce friction? How do we have more control over our process, more insights dynamically and readily available? This is where we're working with the likes of RBC and continuing to evolve the platform.
I am sitting here in awe, listening to both of you. And I can only imagine how others, who hear the story, their first reaction will be, how can I learn more, right? What would your advice be to other colleagues who want to embark on a similar transformation journey?
For me, there are a few learnings, right? The first is that purpose definition. And I know everybody talks about vision, but I think a collective purpose and allowing each member of the team, both internal, external, our partners, to see the purpose which is anchored around the client, made it very tangible and real and very purposeful for the team. I think that's a very powerful piece. Sometimes we don't define it through the client lens truly. We always do it from what is in it for the organization. And that is a very powerful piece. That's the first piece I would say. The second, whenever we tend to do new, we tend to believe that the existing does not have a place, right? And I think that's a very critical piece because the continuity is important, right? It's about showing newer possibilities while continuing to do a lot of what works well. And that balance applies to not only talent. So for example, I told you, for me, it was important that I had the best of RBC participate as much as I had the best from the outside, because that creates faith, trust, and belief in the future of the business model in the same way that we got the clients to participate. The other aspect of it is how do we create continuity on the platforms and the tools as well? Because in a large institution, and it's true of all large institutions, there is pockets of excellence and there's pockets of innovation always happening. How do we make sure that we are bringing that together for the benefit of the entire institution and the client, rather than leaving it in the pockets because that's subject to the flavors of the individual segments? And sometimes we don't apply that. So to me, I call it the gratitude and generosity philosophy together. The gratitude is that we borrow shamelessly, and the generosity is we improve it by giving it greater perspective, higher usage, better frameworks, and give it back for the institution to repurpose and use. And that to me is important as part of the learning process. And lastly, the idea is not to be an island of excellence. The idea is to permeate a mindset and a cultural shift across the institution. So that connectivity and the humility to borrow and give back, it's not about just the speed. It's about speed with the respect for the industrial strength, the safety soundness, and recognizing, especially in a financial world, that we are the first line owners of the risk that the client is undertaking, and therefore to be responsible for it. I think that's a beautiful wrapper. To me, sometimes that's not fully understood when we look at agility as our primary purpose. So that to me are the few learning processes that we've had. I would love to share.
Yeah, and from my perspective as well, I look at it from IBM continually pushing the envelope in terms of how to leverage emerging technologies like hyperautomation, AI, generative AI, even quantum into the future. But we like to call it drinking our own champagne. So we actually reimagine our own processes through intelligent workflows and autonomous agents and those sorts of things as client zero. So then when we're working with the likes of RBC, we're speaking from our own experience in applying these technologies and transforming ourselves as well. And we can speak from a true experience perspective as well.
And you see that as a cultural commonality because the first client for us was ourselves. And we made sure that we tested on ourselves for the first rail and now for ACH. That's exactly what we're going through. You did ask me, what are the moments of truth? It's very exciting and humbling to actually be able to deliver such a magnitude of change in a very short order, but making sure that the safety soundness from a client lens is maintained. So that's really what got the client excited. That's what has got us the various recognitions in the industry. But that's what the partners got excited with to deliver together. And that to me is the value of this relationship.
If I were to be able to sum this up, if I may, this is the poetry of digital transformation. So thank you so much for joining me today, Kartik, and thank you, Matthew.
Thank
Thank you for the
Wonderful.
opportunity to speak.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.